Good evening. Welcome to episode 10 of A1TV for the Mark Show. Tonight's guest, I'd class him as a personal friend, a person I see regularly every year at a charity match down in Hobart or in Tasmania, relive the rivalry. But today I'm going to talk to David Rhys Jones. And before I go on, Rhys, does anyone know you as David or is always Rhys?
Well, the only one who called me David was when I was in trouble with my mum. So all I'd hear is, David, get in here. And so no, it's funny because when I got to South Melbourne as a young bloke, there was probably 4 or 5 Davids in the club at the time. So it was easy. They said, well, you got a nickname? I said, people call me Rhys. So that was it.
Stuck for life.
It did, and some people don't even know I've got a Christian name. I've been to functions where I've been introduced as Rhys Jones. I was going around going, no worries. Yeah, okay.
Just a bit about your history, Rhys. Go on Wikipedia. Played Australian rules football, for those people who don't know. Played for Carlton, Sydney Swans. Was actually South Melbourne before Sydney. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Norm Smith Medallist in a grand final 1987. And we'll talk about that also. Just want to go back to your original club, because it said in the Wikipedia you're from Oakleigh Districts. What's your memories of your junior career at Oakleigh Districts way back when?
Well, I only played there for 1 year, to be honest. I played for a club called Oakleigh Youth Club for most of my junior football career, and we couldn't form an under-15 team. So I played at Oakleigh, the VFA under-15 side for 1 year there when we couldn't form an under-15s. I went back and we couldn't form an under-17s team. So Oakleigh Districts were another team that I had a lot of mates playing at. Dad wasn't keen on me going down there. Federal League was a bit tougher sort of thing, but I managed to convince him, and I went down there and played there for 1 year as an underage, under-18, and got picked up there by South Melbourne.
Do you remember how that happened, how the approach was for young David Rhys Jones to end up at South Melbourne? How old were you back then when you first got picked up?
Yeah, I was 17. I'd just finished playing. I had another year of under-18s to go. The South Melbourne, through Greg Miller, who was our recruiting officer, started a Kazali squad, and he got kids from, there were 4 different zones, and there was a western zone which incorporated some of Williamstown and Altona. There was an eastern zone which was Clayton, Noble Park, parts of a little bit of Oakleigh sort of thing. There was a country zone, a Gippsland zone, and a Wagga. So the 4 teams competed against each other at the end of the year at the VFL Park at the time, down at Waverley, and I apparently did okay. I think Tony Danaher and myself tied for the award and won a couple $100 voucher or something each, and that was the start of it. And then invited down to under-19 training for South Melbourne for the next year.
It says in the history here, 1980 1984 at South Melbourne. And in 1982, Rhys, you went to Sydney. Now, how was that as a young fella told, well, you're going to Sydney? How did you feel about that at the time?
I was fortunate enough to start playing when I was 17 years of age with South Melbourne, and been there a couple of years, and not very successful, the club on the paddock, I suppose, and probably even off-field as well. We didn't have a huge amount of members, and the VFL at the time were keen to get a team in Sydney. They approached the playing group. We were given the pros and cons and everything else, and obviously the telling thing, well, from my point of view, I was keen to go, was we're going to be one team in the biggest city in Australia compared to 11 teams competing for an advertising dollar down here sort of thing. So I actually thought it was going to be great for the club. Little did we know is when we went up there, they didn't really like AFL too much up there, and we didn't get too much coverage. It was sold a bit of a pup really, because we didn't have a ground to train on. A lot of things that really didn't work in those initial stages. Probably the worst thing the VFL ever done was allowed us to live in Melbourne for that first year, and we basically flew up every second Sunday and played footy. New South Wales people didn't really consider us, and Sydney people didn't consider us to be part of them. We're just Victorians flying up every second week and playing footy up there.
Now, you had 4 years up there. Any really good memories of the time playing with Sydney, South Melbourne? We had a couple of coaches in that time, and how did the 4 years go?
I think we beat Carlton, who won the premiership in 82. I think we beat Essendon in 83, who won the premiership. A lot of good friendships were formed, obviously, on and off the field up there. In those early days, all we had was each other, really, family-wise and everything. I mean, we're just thrown up there, and all we had was each other. So I think that helped us a lot. And I think people who look back on those days, we would telecast bounced back to Victoria, Melbourne television every second Sunday. So we were getting more publicity, I suppose, than any other football club. Behind the scenes, it was a lot tougher than that. I mean, we were working at the time. Obviously, it wasn't a full-time profession then. And we'd have to ring the club at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a training night to find out where we were training that night, whether we were training at a local footy ground or an army oval. Out in the, we could have trained anywhere, so just whatever they could get hold of. So it was tough times, but that was part and parcel of that part of my footy career.
Now, in 1985, you had 1985 to 1992, you spent at the Carlton Football Club. Now, the transition between Sydney and Carlton was very interesting because there was a bit of argy-bargy going on, or there's something in your contract that allowed you to go to Carlton back then. What was that about?
Well, at the end of 1984, the VFL sacked the Swans administration, basically all the people we put faith in and relied on while we were up there, and put their own people in. They called a meeting after the end of the 1984 season and said that no one would be getting an increase in their payments in the 1985 season. And I was in the second year of a 3-year contract. So my contract was going up from, say, 30,000 in 84 to 40,000 in 85. And I spoke to them after that because I know what football clubs are like. And I said, look, is this right across the board? And you're not going to be paying people under the table and so forth to keep them there and whatever. And they said, no. I was probably in this situation. I was almost prepared to, I probably would have put a deposit down the house in Sydney the next year and settled up there. And that was what I was thinking. There's an extra 10 grand not going in next year. So I spoke to we didn't have managers back in the day. So I spoke to my accountant who put my contract together. And unbeknownst to me, he put a clause in the contract. He thought things might have gone sour. He said, I put a clause in your contract saying that if you demanded your money at the end of the season and weren't paid in full, within 30 days of that demand, the contract had become null and void. So I said to him, enact it because I know they haven't got any money and they're not going to be able to pay. And the VFL had no money then. They were broke. He enacted it and they couldn't pay. And I was basically a free agent before free agency was even thought of. He said, what do you want to do now? And I said, I want to come back to Melbourne. He said, look, there's going to be a few clubs who are interested and so forth. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, look, I want to play finals footy. Spent 5 years of not playing in a final and the ambition of playing footy, and the reason we play is to hold that premiership cup up one day. At the end of that year, I think Gessner had won another flag in 84. They won 83, 84. I basically said to him, Carlton were, down a little bit for a few years, and I thought that they, always going to bounce back sort of thing. So I asked him to speak to Carlton and they were interested, and we went down and basically I signed within a day.
Jack Elliott would have been way back then very influential in that club. Who are the coaches you had in your period at Carlton? Because I know you had a pretty good relationship with David Parkin. Yeah,
David Parkin was the first year, 85, and then he basically swapped jobs with Robert Walls at Fitzroy, and I had Wallsy who took us to second on the ladder in 86, won a premiership 87, finished third in 88, and was sacked 10 games into 89. So pretty ruthless club Carlton can be at times. So and then Jezza took over, and then for a couple of years, and then Parko come back for my last year. So Parko 85 and 92, and Wallsy and Jezza sandwiched in between.
Rhys, just a couple of questions here. Your best position, because people have said that you played on Dermot Brereton, and obviously there's been stories about that one, but your best position as a child or a kid growing up to the AFL system, what was the transition like going from Oakleigh Districts to VFL footy and the positions you played in that time?
Well, I played in the ruck as a kid, coming from junior footy, I had a bit of a leap on me so I could jump and I got around the ground okay and took a grab, so played mainly in the ruck as a young kid. And when I got to South Melbourne, me and Stuart actually asked me, he said, where can you play? I said, look, I play in the ruck. And he said, well, you won't be playing in the ruck here. I said, look, I played in a wing in a school footy match, threw me on a wing in some practice matches and that, and it just sort of, that became my early position. But I think I played in most positions on the ground throughout my career and really enjoyed enjoyed playing up forward, playing back, playing through the middle, you know, whether it was a wing or on the rare occasion on ball sort of thing. But I enjoyed playing anywhere on the ground, really. It didn't really worry me. I probably got a bit stale at times and frustrated if I was stuck in a position for a bit too long. But, you know, I went down, I kicked goals at times, and went back and was able to stop players. So I consider that was a good trait to have at the time.
It's like playing cricket, Rhys, when you open the batting and you get out first ball or second ball and you've got to wait for the next week. When you're playing, that you had multiple positions to play in, that you would never get bored because you could always go to different ends of the ground, which is a really great trait to have in modern football and yesteryear football.
Yeah, I think a lot of players back in our day were set in positions, and that was where you played, and you were set in stone. And you know, for a long early period in my career, because I was a skinny kid, I was stuck, you know, out on a wing sort of thing for a majority of times. I was, you know, went forward a couple of times and did okay. And I think, yeah, that sort of helped things. But I never played back until 87. You know, that was the first time I sort of put back, and that was a bit of an eye opener back there. It was a great position to play if the midfield and everyone was on top, but it wasn't a great position to play if the midfield were, you know, the opposition midfield were running loose. So it was a bugger of a position.
How is your back, by the way, with the stop marks in your back? How was that?
No, I'm probably knees are my only thing these days. You know, both shot, but yeah, that's, you know, part and parcel of it.
Tell me about 1987, Rhys, because you did win the Norm Smith Medal for the best player on the ground. Do you remember how the day went, how you thought you were going in the game? And yeah, just tell me your thoughts on that day.
I had a job on Dermot Brereton, probably one of the greatest, you know, players to play the game, and a big game player. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, prided himself on playing well in big games, and you know, often did. My job was to curtail him. It was I think it was about 34 degrees, the 87 grand final, so a very hot day. And I kept thinking, you know, we're going to get into it shortly. You know, I mean, we're going to have a blue or something's going to happen. And I don't really want to be wrestling around on a 34 degree day. And I think it might have been the same. So yeah, it was a day where I was able to do a job on a great player, and, you know, lucky enough to win a medal for that, which in some ways I'm pleased of, because it shows I could play football and wasn't just that idiot who got reported 25 times.
So on that, because you lead beautifully into that, about the tribunal and the reports and you having a hot head, was that always the case as a kid growing up, that you had a short fuse, or was just the fact that you just reacted to things on the ground?
Not really. I think back in those days, opposition teams would look at a weakness in a person and would use it, and that could be racially used back then. I mean, that happened. There are a lot of Aboriginal boys who didn't take the racial side of it to, you know, very, very hard, and sometimes you could get under their skin that way. I mean, that was an accepted way of playing back in those days. With me, it was they thought that I'd, you know, had a bit of fire, and if they bit of niggle and stuff, they'd be able to put me off my game. So a lot of teams sent these spuds out to just stand next to you and pinch you and stand on your toes and do whatever. And yeah, so often you'd react to that, and that was, you know, that was my fault early in my career, letting my emotions get the better of me. And yeah, and that's, you know, that's basically what stuck for, especially the early part of my career, where, you know, you'd have people who intentionally go out to try and upset you, which, you know, that was how the game was played back then. That's how it happened.
Have you spoken to Dermot about the day? I mean, Dermot's a great bloke. I mean, if you meet him in person, he's a really good fella. Have you had a conversation with him about the old stoushes between you and him?
Yeah, not really about that. I mean, obviously, I'd say he, you know, and it's obviously be disappointed in not performing on a big day, because he was so good at performing, you know, on the biggest day. So that'd probably be a regret in his, you know, his career. But that's you know, it's something you'd have to talk to him about. But a terrific bloke, just a fantastic bloke. He's called the kid, and I think even to today, you know, he's still half a kid sort of thing. I don't think he's ever, you know, Peter Pan sort of thing. I don't think he's ever going to grow up, and good on him.
The Carlton Footy Club, Rhys, I've seen you at a few functions at the MCG when Carlton have been playing. Your heart still beats blue and white. You're really, or the dark blue and white, you're really connected still to the Carlton Footy Club?
Yeah, look, I'm president of past players down there. Put a bit back in there, and, you know, I'll probably get a bit passionate at the footy footy sometimes and bang on the windows and so forth. But, I'd love to see Carlton get back up there. And it's funny, when I first got back involved with the Past Players organisation, we actually didn't get involved with the Past Players. We started a new group called the Spirit of Carlton. And this is when Carlton had, was rock bottom sort of thing financially on the field and so forth. And there's a group of us who thought we'd get together and do something to help the club and raise some money and do some things, picking up the past players who were, getting to be probably stale at that stage and involving that as well. And we're still doing it. I mean, we've been running functions every year, except last year, of course, but we probably tip in somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 to the club in the football department and help them out where we think we can. So, and also be able to help past players in, their sort of problems and different things that occur for them throughout the course of their life as well.
Fantastic. Now, I want to go post AFL, VFL career. North Launceston, 1995. You won a flag with North Lonnie, wasn't it? You went 1992, I think, down there. It was flag in 95. Is that right? Yeah,
93 was my first year there. We finished runners-up to Clarence, and I took them from second on the ladder to about eighth on the ladder the next year, and I think half the committee wanted to get rid of me, so we got rid of half of the committee and we won a premiership the next year. So it was pretty good times.
Then you went to Frankston in the VFL. You coached down at Frankston. Yep. How was that experience?
Yeah, it was good. It was, obviously disappointing. We made the finals for 3 years. We were there. We'd lost 2 grand finals in a row, 96 and 97. We should have won that first one. I don't think we're probably good enough the second time around, but a little bit of undiscipline, a few other things. But yeah, we should have won 96, but that's the scoreboard showed that Springvale were a couple of points in front of us at the end of the game.
And then you move on to Heidelberg, the old Diamond Valley Rhys. What was it like going out to the Heidelberg Footy Club?
It was fantastic, actually, and we had some pretty good players. There were quite a few blokes come across from Preston, the old VFA, or VFO, whatever they were back then. The year I coached them, we just had a shocking run with luck. We just, I'll never forget, I think it was a Thursday before the first game. We were out on a paddock away from the Heidelberg ground. I think cricket was still going. Actually, it might have been a couple of weeks before the first game, and cricket must have been still going or something was happening. Gee, it was one of the best training sessions I'd seen. We were just flicking around and had this gun centre half forward. All of a sudden, I said, well, I think one of the assistants who was there, I said, we'll do this for 15 minutes. And the ball was just pinging around. I was just loving it, sort of thing. And come over and said, 15 minutes is up. I said, we'll just go for a couple more. In that couple of minutes, the centre forward's gone down, done his ACL. And, you just kick yourself afterward. We lost a couple other players with ACLs and then serious injuries in, I think, one in the practice match, one in round one. So it became a bit of a battle that year, but it was a great club and something I really enjoyed.
Now, Rhys, this year is? It's 20 years this year since you and I crossed paths again. You know what that is? 20 years this year. The Hammerheads. The coach of the Hammerheads, the Craig Hutchison, Tim Watson inspired Hammerheads, played in the Western Region Footy League, won a flag, and there were some great characters in that, and you were a premiership coach in that year, Rhys. Now, is there a chance of a reunion this year because of the 20-year reunion?
There'll be a massive chance now I know about it. No, I didn't realise it was 20 years. So
20 years.
I'm going to have to contact a few of the boys now and make sure we do have a good reunion because that was different. It was different. It was when you got producers and you're trying to coach a football team and you got producers telling you who can be in and who can be out during the week is it makes life a little bit tougher. But the guys were fantastic. They were terrific. They got to a stage where they realised they were a chance to win, and then they all wanted to win and all wanted to be part of it. And even the guys who knew they weren't good enough, and there were some of them who went to the producers and actually said, look, I shouldn't be playing, even though they were characters on the show sort of thing. They realised that they shouldn't have been playing in the grand final. We had better players to stand up and get in there. But they were fitter than every team in the league. And as you can imagine, with Western Region's second division, a lot of blokes can't train. And whereas with our group, they had to train. And one thing I knew is if we were close at half time, we'd win every game we played in.
Some of those boys in that team could have played high level footy. They were first division players. And, Swanee and a few of those boys, McCallium, they were very good players. I've got really good memories of that year.
Yeah, well, McCallum went over to the East and he went to Baldwin. A friend of mine was coaching them and he come looking for Jaco, who was a boy from the West who played all right. And I said, mate, you want to get hold of this kid Macca? And I said, he's an absolute star. Well, I think they won the premiership. He won the best and fairest medal in the Eastern Football League. So, had a couple of good players, a couple of very good players. And
bloke will watch this, Heath Buck, who is a very good friend of mine now, Bucky. He'll be watching this show and he'll certainly remember the time of the Hammerheads for sure.
Yeah, and he was a good player too. You know, I mean, we had a handful of blokes who could play, you know, a fair bit, but we carried quite a few who couldn't play too much. So, they deserved that premiership. It was good.
Just a couple more, Rhys. Just want to talk about, I know that in your personal life you've got a son that's got a disease called Prader-Willi syndrome, and you obviously got a couple of other kids. That must be a bit of a challenge every day.
Yeah, it is. You know, I mean, being a parent is a challenge in itself. I've got 5 kids from 2 marriages, and and Cooper, he's my second youngest, 17 now, and doing okay. They're all different in a lot of ways, but he's got Prader-Willi syndrome, has his issues. It's a complex disorder he's got, but he's coping with it all right. And I think, you know, that's your lot in life, and that's what you got to just win them and wear them and get on with things.
You're an ambassador too, which is a great thing, Rhys. So while I'm asking, how often do you catch up with your old teammates? Obviously at the footy every week they get along and see the Blue Baggers play. They're actually improving, I reckon, Carlton, and they're going along really well. Got some good young players in the team at the moment. Yeah,
they have, and I've been to a couple of games this year, and I went to the first game against Richmond. I thought they were pretty good that night against the reigning premiers, but a little bit up and down. I went to the Freo game. They too good that day, but they're a frustrating team at times. But I'm pretty passionate about them getting back up there and getting that 17th premiership.
Last one, Rhys. The best player you play with and the best player you played against?
Oh, look, the best player. I always loved playing with Wayne Johnson. He's sort of, the bigger the match, the more he fired up. And Jono was a great one to play with. Played with a lot of great players and against a lot of great players too. I mean, I started on a wing playing on guys like, you know, Schimmelbusch and Flower and Keith Gregg. Go right through, and Brian Wood. Every team, Dougie Hawkins. Every team had a great wingman. Michael Turner down at Geelong. Gee, you just keep the list just goes on and on. Played on Dipper on a wing. Great players. And people ask who's the best players sort of saw, and I'd say Gary Ablett Senior was probably the one who stood out in the fact that I don't think he really knew how good he was. He could do everything. He could take the highest mark. He could kick the longest goal, both feet. He'd hit blokes and hurt them. You know, he hurt a lot of blokes out on the footy field. And probably the only thing I never saw him do was handball, but I don't think he had to. I don't think he ever had to hand it off. So he was probably the best I saw. But
David Rhys Jones, episode 10, A1TV, The Mark Show. Thanks for joining me, Rhys. It's been a great chat. Great to catch up. I'm sure I'll catch up with you later in the year. I think at Relive the Rivalry down in the Huon Valley, I think it is.
Huon Valley, yeah. It's cold down there, I know that.
Bring your jacket with you. But thanks very much, Rhys.
Well, certainly will. Good to see you, Stoney. You're all right, mate.
Cheers, mate.